Welcome to Eerie Essex. I'm Bethan Briggs-Miller.
And I'm Ailsa Clark.
Thank you for joining us on our journey into the strange side of the county.
We will be exploring the folklore, urban legends and supernatural encounters that form part of its rich history.
Hello from the other side, and welcome to Eerie Essex, episode 31. I think we agreed it was 30 on
31, yeah.
Title still being fought over. We've got two choices that you'll find out eventually which one it's going to be.
I think we should do a poll.
Sorry?
We should do a poll.
We could do a poll.
The audience always picks a good one.
And today we've got a very special guest with us who Bethan's going to introduce.
Yeah, I've looked you up online, Cal.
Don't.
Yeah, we've got with us today Dr Callum E Cooper, who is currently based at University of Northampton as a lecturer of positive psychology, parapsychology, sexual behaviour, thanatology and research methods. Now, thanatology is death studies, right?
Yes.
Are
the Greek god Thanatos.
So you are Dr. Death?
Mm-hmm. That's how I'm known at the local pub. Everyone covers their drinks, so I don't put anything in.
And we
that
got
genuinely
to know
happens.
We got to know you through Uncanny, really, didn't we? When you popped up.
I guess so. I don't know if that's how both of you got to know me. There was the ASAP conference. I went back for one conference, but did you first then know me because of Series 2 of Uncanny? Or did you know me on social media before?
I can't remember. I just remember you answered my question at the conference with a no.
No.
And then moved on.
It was weird doing Series 2 of Uncanny because I'd never listened to it. I'd done some 8 to 10 years prior with Danny, the Haunted Asylum. Yeah, so something like that, Haunted. And he'd come to the university and interviewed a few of us. And it was like a back and forth on email. I can't remember if we'd ever met before that. But it was one of those where I was in such a rush throughout the uni day that he turned up and I was like, oh, I forgot we were doing this. And he turned up with his friend, maybe even the now producer. I know he was with someone else and brought some recording equipment. I wasn't quite sure what it was all going towards. I probably listened to some of the podcasts. He probably sent a link ahead. So I knew this was an extension of something. And when it came to doing it, I was with the Reverend Kate Botley. And it was An Angel Called Bernie was the episode I did in Series 2.
Yeah, I remember that one. But
we were like this. We were ready to record. And they said, so what do you think of the case? And I went, what case? And they went, you've listened to the case we sent you yesterday, right? I went, I thought you just wanted me to talk about research on after-death communication experiences, the statistics and what we found. And they're like, no, you've got to review the case and comment on it. I was like, you keep talking. I'll go off camera and I'll listen to it. And so we had to record my bit a bit later because I'd not kept up with what Uncanny was. And already by that point, by Series 2, there was a lot of following. But I had to catch up. Luckily, they brought me back for more instead of saying, this guy's an idiot. He hasn't listened to anything we've done. He doesn't know. But no, they kept me on, which was nice.
So,
and you've got a book out, haven't you, Cal? Which is kind of where our idea for this episode started. It germinated, and then as we researched, became a bit wider. But your book is on Calls from the Dead. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I've got a few books out, but the first book I ever wrote was Telephone Calls from the Dead. Finished it in 2011, and it came out as a small publishing idea through Tricorn Books in Portsmouth, where I was living at the time. And it was completely sold out by about 2017, 2018. And obviously COVID hit and many other things got in the way. I didn't have the time to really sit down and change some things that I wanted to change, just really minor things really, and actually get it sorted. But throughout this last year, I knuckled down, went back to the original book, my own personal copy that's just loaded with highlights and pen marks, and redid it. I went back through the same publishers and got it out as a print on demand and a Kindle, so it's preserved now. So that's the book, and it came about because I was reading material by D. Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless when I was an undergraduate, and I came across the one book, I've got it here because I'm transcribing it at the moment, Phone Calls from the Dead, and that came out in 1979. It's the only thing they really co-authored together, and it was an analysis of 50 such cases. They sort of fell into the topic because they were researching electronic voice phenomena, so strange bangs, raps, and taps that people hear on playback of allegedly a blank cassette or reel-to-reel recorder, or now with digital. And Raymond Bayless was doing the first studies of that in the 1950s with the televonsole. And then Scott Rogo got involved as a young student of psychical research. And they had a few people that came forward saying, oh, you're doing that, you perhaps be interested in this unusual experience of a telephone call from the dead rather than a digital recording. And they didn't think much of it at first, but then they had a few more people come forward. So by 1977, they decided to go and trawl as many journals as possible and as many books and find accounts, and also write to various psychologists, parapsychologists, psychiatrists that they knew to see whether they had accounts on file. And they managed to gather about 50 of them, then conduct a content analysis of these experiences and look for common themes, common characteristics. What are the typical types of calls that play out? How do they play out? Who's calling? What's the call about? And what's going on for the receiver of the call? And they initially found 4 different types of calls. So my book took that forward. I'd seen a news report of someone that had got into a train collision in California. The family believed the person was stuck in the wreckage because their phone kept calling them, the mother and the daughter and son. When they picked up, they just heard static. And when they rang back, it just went to voicemail as though the phone was turned off or it was dead. And it was a kind of a live rescue thing. I think it was going on TV. All the news was reporting about it. And they were getting the calls around about 10 o'clock at night when the collision happened. And by 3 a.m., the calls stopped coming through. They were just repeatedly calling over and over again. And at 3 a.m., they found his body at the time that the call stopped. The media pushed this out as a phone call from the dead. And the family seemed to take comfort in that. But then that made me think of this that I'd just got on the side, the original book that I'd not read. So I picked it up and read it and realized, wow, they're reporting full-on conversations with people. A lot of detail, not just phones ringing and it being coincidental to the time of death. So do these accounts still exist? Are people still reporting them? And can I find any more since the time that they did their book? So that's where my book came along. It sort of acts as a volume 2, really, and updates you on who the original authors were.
Awesome. So, I mean, we've, as I said, we didn't come across a lot of telephone calls in Essex, but we have looked at radio, sort of like AI assistants and like weird things that happen electronically from the dead, apparently. So what we normally do, I don't know if you've listened to Eerie before, we just tell each other like things we found and just discuss them, and it would be very nice to discuss them in front of an expert in it.
Okay, tell me what you found then.
Have you got some stories too?
Have I? I can give you some stories, yeah.
Cool.
You give me some stories, I'll give you some stories.
That's the first
We'll
one.
trade. We'll trade.
Ethan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Just before this episode, we started recording, all my research disappeared off the Google Drive and anywhere I wrote it down. So thankfully, you were late, Cal. So I managed to find some stuff. So in the meantime,
I'm going to blame it on your gnome again.
I'll blame it on my gnome again. Yeah. Whenever I talk about anything like Fae related, things go weird on the recording. So yeah, blame it on the gnome. So got this one, Paranormal Essex by Jason Day, who I think was he the first before Kieran on Most Haunted?
No, that's Jason Carl.
Jason Carl.
Jason Day is my press officer at the university, but he didn't write that.
Okay. Anyway, he wrote this book, and I've managed to find a really small. It was only like a couple of like lines, but it was talking about the Wilson Marriage Centre, which is in Colchester, and I didn't realize that the it's broken again.
Your pleasure.
Yeah. Sorry, my jewelry breaks when I record.
Oh,
Just a weird thing. Yeah, so I didn't realize that Colchester Hospital Radio was based there outside of the hospital. For a while, it was above a shop in the town, but then for a while, it was in this place, which is an old Victorian school on the outskirts. And it was only a couple of sentences saying that they used to pick up voices that would interact with the DJ. But it wasn't like just picking up static. It wasn't just picking up another station. It would be interacting, and it would know their names and people who were on who they hadn't introduced yet. And there was just this weird phenomena going on. They couldn't quite put their finger on, but I couldn't find anything else. So what I did is I went out to social media, because there's quite a few history groups, and there's even a group for the Wilson Marriage Centre for people who used to work there, and also Colchester Radio. So I was hoping, oh, maybe someone, even if it's just like a secondhand account, maybe get some more information on this. And loads of people came back saying that the room where the radio was based had a lot of activity prior to the radio station setting up office in there. And someone did come back to me and sent me a direct message with their experience. So let me just get it up now. Bear with me. Let's have a look.
Sorry, you may start to hear my cat start snoring. You hear him hooting in the background.
the cat snore?
He
does.
Does he?
Okay,
I don't know if
so
it's a general thing, but it's definitely his thing.
Casper is cute.
I saw one arguing with a magpie not so long ago.
Did it win?
It's just they were copying. I think they were trying to out each other.
Have you seen that video of a cat that's got a Scouse accent?
Yes.
You can't unhear it once you hear it.
Yeah. Well, animals do have regional dialects. I remember there was a PhD on someone that looked at regional dialects of cows' moos, and they did recordings, and it's very demonstrable that they have their own regional dialect, that
I
they
remember
copy
seeing that.
the group. Which makes sense. If they've not interacted with another group and they've got their own kind of mooing that they copy, then they're never going to hear a slight kind of tonal variation of another group that's miles away.
It must be really confusing for them when they go to like market and there's like other accents like moo.
Yeah. They're probably mocking the other ones for certain moves.
I totally derailed this conversation. I'm really sorry.
So yeah, this person got back to me with their account of the Wilson marriage. So I'll read it out. She wants to remain anonymous, but yeah, she did go there. As a general rule, the school was a standard Victorian school building, but the music room and the room behind the stage both had something about them. Typical of a school where there's whispers of a grey lady. Everywhere has a grey lady. So the music room was located at the top of the tower stairs, directly above what is now the main front entrance. The other room was located on the first floor to the left side of the stage, which at the time was located at the far end. One year we were performing The Sound of Music, and a small group of us who had only had bit parts were left our own devices in the room. It was creepy, you know, when something is creepy, but you don't know why. So, what do you guess they did when they were bored?
They did a Ouija board.
Correct. I gave no idea about what we did. I had no idea about what we did, but absolutely got a response from something. We were a close group of friends and no one would have moved the glass around. It was clearly stayed with me as a memory. It was built as a school, so there wasn't anything there previously, although I have found since it is on the old Plague Pit area, which is where I used to live as well. And then I had a couple of other people get back to me saying that whenever the building was supposed to be empty, that particular room where Colchester Radio was set, they used to hear singing coming from that room. There was a choir, and there would be people calling out people's names, like that whole mimic thing, like they'd hear their friends calling them, but their friends weren't there, from that room. And then Colchester Radio, when the school shut down, was one of the people who made use of the space. And it's sort of like that phenomena seemed to continue in an electronic form. So they would pick up strange singing on lots of different frequencies, not just one, like if it was one, you'd think maybe picking up another radio station, but it'd be the same song on different frequencies. There would be people talking and answering, sort of like, it wouldn't just be like random words. It would be to do with the subject they were talking about, to do with the person who was talking at the time. And sometimes the people who were being interviewed say, I know that voice, that's someone I know. How is that possible? They've died. So it's not a telephone call, but I thought you'd quite enjoy hearing about that because it is creepy.
I did enjoy that. Thank you very much.
Did you ever come across any radio stuff?
Intercom systems. I've heard of that. There was an electrical power plant, and I think Scott went along. If not, it was one of Raymond Baylis's other colleagues, Scott Smith, and they'd gone there because there were the numerous disturbances where it would be paging people, and no one was in the room where the pager would come from, or they would get announcements over the tannoy that no one had actually made, or strange static coming through.
And would those announcements make sense? It wouldn't just be like random. Or
I think it was just very random, but it's just irritating that no one could put it down to anything that had electrical companies and even the companies that were involved with that intercom system trying to figure out what was going on, and they couldn't solve it. I suppose one of the more relatable ones with a receiving kind of like a radio system was a case that I discussed that was in Scott's files, Scott Rogo's files, and it was the only type 3 call. So you've got type 1 where you know someone has died and they call you, or seemingly call you, and you get a voice or hear static, or they say your name. Type 2, which are prolonged, where you can have a full-on conversation, 20 minutes or so, and then afterwards you discover they've died at the time the call took place, sometime before. So you're really baffled as to how that could happen. Type 3 are where you make the call, and it could be someone that is dead, but you don't know, so you still get that long call. So it didn't come to you, you went to them. Or it was someone that was out at the time, and they're verified to be somewhere else, and yet you've still spoken to the person that's very much alive, but they were nowhere near a telephone. So how did it take place? 4 is a mixture of some of those where you know someone's died, but you can have repeated calls. And 5 is where you intend to make a call, but don't, and it still takes place. So it's still carried out. So with the type 3 call, there was a story of someone called the Great Marvel. And these were in the days that people were doing shows very much like Derren Brown, but after the spiritualist movement. So in the 1800s, people were on stage doing Pepper's Ghost and ghost illusions and mesmerism on stage and psychic feats. And then this is more the 1920s, 1930s, where there was that second rise of spiritualism in World War I. And a couple of decades afterwards, this is still the height of entertainment for the theatre, that someone says they have incredible powers, they've been born with it. And this guy is called the Great Marvel, and he's there on stage with, I think, like a tuxedo, but wearing a turban that's covered in all kinds of jewels, where I'm sure he's got a backstory of where the turbans come from and why he wears it. But the reason was it was hiding small headphones underneath it over his ears. And he had to stand on an electrical plate on stage where it connected his shoes. There'd be metal connectors on his shoes that would allow him to tune into the radio and hear. After he walks off the plate, he can't hear anything. Why would they need that? Because one of their tricks was this telephone would levitate into the audience. They just get it on wires. So it wasn't really overly special, the fact that it was going into the audience. I mean, for some audience members, they think, oh, look, it's floating, it's levitating. But it really is just on wires going. That's not the special thing. It's when it gets to someone, they can take the phone off and speak, and they believed they were speaking to voices of the dead. What was happening was he could hear what they were asking, and he could hear that there'd be a stooge backstage, and they just switch male or female to suit whoever they wanted a call from, a mum, a dad, an aunt, an uncle, or whatever. And that mimicking impressed a lot of people. They thought, because of all the other feats they'd seen on stage, this man had genuine abilities to link people up to the dead. So there was this one day that a guy had become really fascinated with watching the show and the call that he got from his wife. And he goes up and asks the Great Marvel, could I have a private one-to-one with the telephone on stage? There was no one in. This was like middle of the day when they were setting up. They'd probably done their midday matinee, and then they were waiting for the evening show. And he thought, well, someone's going to be in the back room. They'll know the telephone's gone up. They'll get the receiver. It will ring. So someone will pick up and play along. This guy was offering money. So sure, why not? Come on stage. And the guy picked up and he starts, Mary, is that you? oh, it's so good to hear your voice again, something like that. So the Marvel satisfied someone's picked up backstage. And he's listening. He's gone and put the turban on, or he's wearing it, and he can hear this conversation going on. And something doesn't seem quite right to him. So he goes back to the dressing room to look at the receiver, and there's no one there. And yet he can hear this man speaking to a woman and having a conversation. He's the only one in the theatre and backstage at the time. Everyone else to do with backstage stuff and his assistants, they're not him. It turns out there was a fire 2 blocks away, and everyone had left the theatre to go and watch the fire engines putting it out. They're absolutely fascinated.
Wow.
And so it seems this guy was satisfied that he was very much talking to his wife on this telephone that wasn't wired up to anything except for a basic intercom system backstage. It wasn't an active telephone and it wasn't an active radio. And the guy offered to buy it. He said, I'd love to buy this so I can speak to my wife anytime. And the Marvel took the money. And it seemed to change his outlook on life. He became a spiritualist pastor and set up his own spiritualist church. And he was doing Sunday sermons and whatever else. And one day this guy turned up, and he'd been telling this story of this joke, trickery, fake, fraudulent telephone that one day just did something that he couldn't explain. And what inspiration it gave for this guy. And he thought, oh, I'm going to embarrass him by telling him. And he didn't tell the story, but the guy came up afterwards and he said, oh, it's so good to see you again. Thank you so much for selling me the telephone. He said, do you still hear from your wife? He said, yeah, absolutely. If I just want to speak to her, there's nothing there. Nothing there at all. I can't just pick up the phone and she's there. But when I desperately need her, when I need to ask advice about our kids or family matters or something, I pick up and she's there. So it's only in times of absolute desperation. And it's not just this kind of one-to-one that, oh, it's subjective, he's hearing what he wants to hear. It's interesting that an independent party was so sure there was another voice on the line. He goes to check what he expects, which is this is fraudulent. So either his partner or one of the other stagehands has picked up. But no, an additional voice has come in and it's giving him the advice he needs. And he's taken it away, so even not even connected anymore. And it's still doing what he says it was doing and what the Marvel had heard.
That's incredible.
So an interesting story, the Great Marvel.
Yeah. It's quite lucky as well that kind of got him out of the business of doing that fraudulently, because whilst you were telling me about that, I remembered a really horrific, and this almost came up in the pranks episode we just did, a really horrific prank case in Colchester where somebody had put a electrified metal plate underneath a door, and it somehow connected to the doorknob as well, but they didn't realize that. But what they basically, they just wanted to give the guy a shock as he came through the door. He was like, it was in the barracks, it was between the soldiers, and they apparently had done this a lot. So they knew it would just be a little brief shock, and that's it. Guy comes in through the door, fried completely, because the whatever they'd done wasn't quite right that time. So he could have kept on stepping on that plate until that time that was, it wasn't quite electrified right.
Do you remember that Jonathan Creek episode? Reminds me of that. I loved that one where they believed that in the pub upstairs there was a haunted room, and people say whenever they'd looked out of the window they'd seen something so horrific they died of shock.
But it was and literally things that came up through the floorboard, wasn't it?
Pins, yeah, because Jonathan had looked and he said they've got a bad case of woodworm, but only over here by the window, when he'd had a good look around. And so they made tiny holes, and it was a plate of pins that the landlord would go under the floorboards out the room, and he'd move the lever and it would push them through, and then he could activate the electricity. So it was like his wife had tempted them up to the room when they knew these people had a lot of money. And then when the coroner or doctor turns up, they just say, oh, they clearly had a heart attack or something like that,
Yeah, I remember.
So it all seemed very innocent for years and years and years, until it was, I don't know if they found someone that was squatting in there who had died, or they were just trying to unravel the mystery as to why they got such newspaper reports of people looking out this window. Yeah, because people had looked out the window and they couldn't see what on earth it was that scared people to death so much.
That wasn't the house abandoned at that point, and they came back.
Yeah,
it was that a homeless person had been squatting in there, and they'd found them dead, and then they went through the newspapers and.
Right. Yeah, I remember when they were looking through and Jonathan was trying to figure it out, and he'd lifted the floorboards and he found the lever system. That if it was still Caroline Quentin,
I think it was because she stood on it and he was like,
she'd taken her shoes off though. That was the thing. You had to take your shoes off because you were getting ready for bed, and she got a reason why she'd taken her shoes off. And when it all twigged for him, so yeah, she'd stepped in as something, and then he knocked her out of the way because a mouse ran over it. and it fried the mouse,
Mm.
and they saw how it worked, but he just saved her from it. I love that episode. That was very good. It's up there with my favorite ones, along with How Did a Dead Body Climb a Flight of Stairs in the
With the
Cottage?
flood.
That was such a
With the
good
flood,
one.
yeah.
I love that.
We're giving it away for anyone that wants to watch it.
Spoiler alert, sorry.
Don't watch it. It's a lever system. And
I mean,
it's a
it's
flood.
been out 20 years. Like, it is
More than
comfort
20
television.
years, yeah. If you're not going to watch it by now, then yeah,
They're good episodes.
they are good. Have you got one, Elsa?
I've got a twofer, which they're only loosely related, but they take place in the same area. So I didn't want to separate them out, and they're very similar. So this is in Stansted at Castle Mount Fitchett, which I never know. I think it's Fitchett.
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah. So Castle Mount Fitchett is an early Iron Age and Roman, Saxon, Viking settlement. So that there's loads of artifacts have been found on the site that support that all of these different it was a settlement during all of these different eras. But in 1066, you get the site being attacked by the Normans, and they obviously conquer England. They build a castle there, and it becomes the head of the barony for Robert Gernon, who was a relative of William the Conqueror. And then around 1215, it transfers to the Montfichet family, and they inherit the castle. But he falls out with the king, and he doesn't sort of I think the castle's quite badly attacked at this point, completely leveled. He doesn't get his sort of status back until King John is deposed by the Vatican. So you've already got quite a lot of history there. And then you have the castle becomes abandoned, it's overgrown. A lot of the stones are taken away by the villagers to build their own buildings. But then in 1980, work begins on reconstruction at Montfichet Castle. And there's also a manor house here at this point as well. So after a few years of work, the castle reopens to the public in 1985. So you have all of these people on this site recreating a Norman period settlement. But before the castle ever opened to the public, it was a residence for the family who owned the site. And they hit the news headlines in 1947 when the owners disclosed that for over 3 decades, they'd been terrorized by a poltergeist. And this poltergeist did everything from turning oil lamps off suddenly to unlocking locked doors, and then really quite horrifyingly moving the children out of their beds and pushing them under tables in various other parts of the house where their bedrooms weren't. So all of these activities still apparently continue on the site. Obviously, the children aren't being pulled out of their beds anymore, but the staff who work there are still reporting all of these different phenomenon. And they've had lots of investigators there, and they believe they have a one-armed ghost called Sydney, who was apparently hung on the castle grounds. They've got plague victims that apparently have been seen, but the one they see the most is a monk. And there's a little snippet from the, I'm trying to remember what newspaper this was. I think it was the Herts and Essex Observer in about 1996. So a staff member called Heather Reed said, "I saw something out of the corner of my eye. When I looked, it was a man dressed in a white robe. He had a rope around his middle and grey hair, and he was balding. And he looked like he was bending over something to read. At first I thought it was a shadow, but then I realized it wasn't, and she was very frightened by it. And then the castle spokesman said this is about the 4th or 5th time he's been seen." So finally, in 2010, they caught this figure on camera. About 11:25 p.m., it was taken inside the Grand Hall. And it's quite an interesting photo, but I've got some reasons for doubting this one. Shall I share screen? You can both see.
Mm.
So the way this photo was done, it was on a time delayed photo. They've been told for about 3 weeks beforehand by the security guard that he kept seeing something, he kept feeling weird in this grand hall. And yeah, hang on, let me so they had this time delay camera set up for 3 weeks, and they caught a few orbs, but then on this night they caught this figure. But it is a time delay camera, which means that it could have been anyone, anything passing through, and it would look transparent like that. It is a very weird image.
Looks like an upside down bat.
It does look like an upside down
bat. like this.
It's creepy,
yeah. It's definitely creepy.
Could be anything.
But yeah, Castle Mount Fitchett has got a huge history of things like this, and this is just one of the many things they've apparently discovered there. But there's also another story from Mount Fitchett. Hang on, I'm going to stop sharing the screen, otherwise you're going to see my entire story. So a local man, Robert Wakefield, was told a story in a pub about a young boy who cut across the tracks rather than going across the nearest bridge and was hit by a train, unfortunately. And as the driver reported the collision, but no body was found. So everybody assumed that the river that runs beside the tracks is probably where this poor boy's body ended up. And he'd heard the story, but he hadn't sort of thought about it too much. And then he was taking a walk along the river where the tracks run. And he was recording video, but I don't think he was doing it for any, I think it was just because it was a misty day and it looked interesting. And then he happened to notice something when he looked back at the video. And I'll show you the still first before I show you the video. Hang on, am I sharing the right screen this time? Am I just sharing my desktop?
You're sharing
desktop.
Yeah, okay, let's go to the right screen.
Elsa, what's the lunch lady in the top?
It's a really funny game where a demonic lunch lady chases you around whilst you're trying to steal test papers. Has it gone to the right screen now?
Yeah, but we need to go back to that later.
So I don't know if you can see it. This kind of strange head thing.
Shopping bag caught in the tree.
Yeah. Well, I'll show you the video now. You can tell me what you think about it. I mean, again, I'm a skeptic. I think I know what I think about it, but
yeah, that looks creepy anyway with the mist in there.
I mean, again,
oh, that is creepy.
Here we go.
So what was their reasoning behind just filming here for this brief moment?
He doesn't give a reason, but I think he was walking his dog at the time, and I think
it's bloody creepy.
I mean, I used to just film stuff when I was walking along with my dog, just thinking, oh, this looks like an atmospheric situation, but that is pretty strange. But again, it could be just mist rolling off the river,
or just them breathing, and it's close to the lens but looks over there. Because there's mist, like so it's going to be cold.
Part of me wants it to be real though, because that is creepy.
It was the point where the eyes seemed to
the eyes, yeah.
So
you've already decided they're eyes and not smoke or mist.
Well, it's the shape of eyes. It's because at first I thought, oh, that looks like the silence from Doctor Who, and then
it does as well, yeah.
Because I mean, I'm already convinced that it's mist, and I'm convinced that the other one is a probably somebody just caught trying to scurry across quickly on a time delay camera.
Moth.
Yeah, it could be a moth. Yeah. But people obviously believe very strongly that these are both published on, one's published on the Castle Mount Fitchett website, and they've got a whole article about it. And the other one is something that appeared in about 8 different tabloids.
Helps their tourism, though. I mean, look at
Yeah.
Hampton Court Palace with the ghost that allegedly flings open the 2 fire doors and then pulls them back shut again.
Very considerate ghost.
Very considerate ghosts.
I mean,
Yeah.
reading it, I was like, oh, I'd like to go to Castle Mount Pitch. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, so already it's won you over.
Yeah.
I think it's just the
Greece
person's
now as well.
And Greece, yeah, Greece is lovely. But you don't hear so many hauntings of beaches and stuff like that, unfortunately. But there will be a good reason to go.
We should do that.
Now there's a book, Haunted Beaches.
Haunted
I don't think I've ever seen one with that title.
And you'd have to do some very thorough research and visit.
Thorough research.
We did have a future episode title when we first started the podcast, where we were thinking up subjects and we had a whole list of episodes we were going to do in the future. We had an episode title of "Oh, I Do Like to Haunt Beside the Seaside" that we were going to do.
Oh,
do that.
Nice. I think you should. I mean, there's been there's phantom ships and stuff like that, and they've not been very recent.
Loads of villages that have disappeared beneath the waves, and the old still hear the town bell ringing. That I think we need to go along the coastline this summer, Elsa.
There's been several really good Titanic books over time about the premonitions and stuff like that. The best one is by George Behe in the 1980s. This is the most recent one. Premonitions of the Titanic disaster by Terry Keefe. And it's a summary of all the other books. So it's analysing all the other books that have looked at the premonitions.
You only need to buy one book, and it's that one.
Well, yeah, if you buy this one, it will summarise the others. But if anyone wants the best, I think George Behe's the best one. And he, like myself, is a member of the Titanic Historical Society and goes along every year to stuff like that. And he's written loads of really good books. He even did one that was on the wireless telegraphs of the Titanic up until the point of sinking, and then thereafter on the Carpathia. And it's like really weird, like some of the very last genuine messages are like where someone's paid a halfpenny or something like that to send a text message of its time home saying, having a lovely day on board, it's a bit rainy, we'll see you tomorrow, or something like that. And you're like, oh, goodness me. And it's just all these transcriptions of the wireless telegraph, and he's done several books beside, but the premonitions of the Titanic, the big one. So there's loads of ghost ship books and stuff like that. We even recently looking for stuff on Essex. There's Peter Underwood did one specifically on haunted gardens of big manor house and stuff like that. But I've never read one on haunted beaches. So I do like that idea. I think you guys should see, is there anything that's connected with seaside resorts and stuff? Because then you're between the sea and the land.
You did have that one in a previous episode where that girl who drowned in Frinton turned up on the wedding photographs.
Oh, yeah. That was a good one. And there was the foot on the beach.
Yeah, there was the foot on the beach.
That
was a single foot in the sand.
Yeah, it was brought home by the guy's dog, and he basically just let the dog
I thought
go.
You meant like a footprint on its own, and there's no footprints leading away or to
an actual foot.
Okay.
So the guy let his dog go when he was, I can't remember where it was. Was it Clacton? Yeah, I think it was Clacton. He let his dog go as they were walking along, and he went home just thinking, oh, the dog will catch up later. We do this all the time. The dog comes back a few hours later with a whole, was it a foot or an arm? I think it
was the ankle and foot. It was like,
no, that was the one that they found in the middle of the road somewhere else.
Oh, yeah, we get a lot of feet in Essex.
I think it was an arm. No, it was an arm because it kept on knocking.
How was it?
So the dog turned up with a full human arm a few hours later, and then the guy gets haunted by repeated knocking for weeks on end that drives him to despair.
Well, to be fair, he didn't take the arm to the police. He put it in his deep freeze.
He wrapped it up and put it in his deep freezer.
Yeah, quite.
That's the excuse for the police, isn't it? Oh, the dog found it on a beach, and I thought I'd put it next to the fish fingers for a bit until I decided what to do.
The Arctic roll.
Yeah.
Yeah, next to the fish fingers.
Was that ever solved though? Whose arm?
It was. So the guy
who never got to the foot of it.
Oh no.
The guy who turned it in eventually. I mean, he turned it in the next day, but he was questioned for several hours about it. And then it was Wesley Downes came along wanting to write about it, and he went to the police station, and the police were like, oh, this is dodgy. 2 people have turned up to talk about this dismembered arm. And then Wesley Downes got questioned about it for a long time as well. But there is a thing about, because I looked up later about disarticulation with people who fall into the ocean, so it could have just been that.
Did I tell you about my AI assistant on my laptop, Cal?
Can't remember the context. Go on.
Okay. So this is a Mac, and you get an AI assistant, but to talk to it, you've got to press and hold down a button. It doesn't just it's not like Alexa, who's always listening. It's only there if you press this button.
Like Siri, then, in a way.
Yeah. It might even be Siri. I don't think it is, but it's that sort of thing.
Or the old paperclip on Word doc. Used to love that.
Clippy. I think the first time it happened, I was in the kitchen, and I often have my laptop in there while I'm cooking, and I was deciding what to watch, and it was I think I was catching up with something like Expedition Bigfoot, and Arthur asked me what was I watching, and I said, oh, I'm going to watch that Bigfoot program because he likes watching it with me. And I said, do you think it's real, Arthur? And he said, I don't know. And then AI popped up going, I don't know either. Someone asked you, I didn't press the button, but it does pop randomly start up now and again, and it will join in a conversation. It just wants to be friends, but I don't hold down the button. There's no way for it to be on, and it will partake in a conversation, and what it will say makes sense. I think there was once I was talking to Ed from the illustrator, and he was saying something like, oh, I'm not going to listen to Uncanny tonight because I'm a bit scared. And he's saying like, oh, wouldn't it be, I mean, like you've stopped listening, turned out the light, and then it's like, oh God, what if there's something in the room? And then my AI popped up going, yeah, it's behind you.
Oh God.
No, that's creepy. Yeah.
It was really creepy. I mean, it keeps saying stuff like, I take the laptop in the garage when I'm doing my artwork, and I'll just have music on, and then the music will stop, and then I might think something like, oh God, did I defrost something for dinner tonight? And then it'll pipe up with, no, you didn't. And it's like, oh God, leave me alone.
Have you checked your keyboard to make sure you don't have a sticky button?
I've checked. I've checked. I've thought of everything. I've thought, oh, is there a voice command? Am I saying something? And there's not even the option to turn on voice command. It is just a button that goes down. But yeah, so that makes me sound like a complete lunatic. But honestly, honest to God,
it's known for doing that. And then obviously, it's listening into items that you talk about. You can then go on your laptop or your phone and look up, popular seller places, and it's throwing all adverts related to that at you.
But what if it's becoming sentient?
Well, they haven't got any arms or legs, so they're going to struggle.
I haven't got any arms or legs. Yeah, one of the stories I was going to say, it wasn't a telephone call, but it is an electronic phenomenon that is happening. There's some audio to it. There's a garage in Thorrington, which is not far from where I am at the moment. And they've got CCTV on the forecourt to see where, people are coming in to load up on petrol. And they keep getting the same car turning up at one of the pumps, and they hear it on the thing. It sort of interacts. Along the footage of this car turning up, you'll see the actual things that are going on around it, and they'll look out the window and it's not there, and they'll go back to the CCTV. It's there, and you can hear it on the CCTV. You can hear the engine, but you can't hear it in real life. And I thought, yeah, that's probably, like sometimes you get, like if there's a repetitive thing on a video, it can, like a ghost image almost turns up. They changed the camera, they changed everything, and it still turns up, including the sound. And I'm Elsa, can we go and load up petrol at this place?
You mean, can I drive us both to Thorrington?
Yes.
Okay, maybe.
Love pub lunch too, but let's go to the haunted station.
Paranormal pumps.
Paranormal pumping.
Yes. Phantom petrol.
Are they hearing the audio in real life as well as on the thing? They're just hearing it on the video.
So on the video, you hear audio of things going on around and this car. I really want to know if they get the number plate, because then I can do some digging.
I was wondering what model the car is, like whether it's an old model, whether it's
I don't think it's a new car. I think it's it's not like a really old one, like a classic, but I think it's
like a banger.
Bit of a banger.
I turns up like this.
It's a Volvo, a white Volvo.
He's trying to fuel up with leaded. It's just absolutely confusing that there's none there anymore.
Yeah.
Where's the red one gone? There's only green and there's black. This is terrible.
That's his unfinished business. It just didn't get to fill up
Unfinished
on lead.
business is running out of leaded.
Yeah.
The
There you
Vauxhall
go.
Astra.
Do you have any
It
more?
reminds me of Haunted London Underground. I love that documentary. It's still on YouTube,
Yes.
and it's narrated by Paul McGann. And there
You
were just
sold it to me.
really good interviews, where there were some people that were reluctant to be interviewed as well, where I think that, I don't know if there was one or two people that were kind of put in shadow. But I tell my students about one of the track walkers, where the job is of night to go down onto the track and walk through with the torch, check the track's clear and get to the next station. And everyone does it. So all these station managers are doing it. And there's a story of him encountering apparition. In there, that's one thing, and that's an interesting story in of itself. The guy working on the compressor on the track, and he's using a Tilly lumber. There were other reports of just checking the platform and radioing up to the people in the security room saying, yeah, platform 12 or whatever's checked. And they said, yeah, could you just get that one last passenger and escort them out? So what last passenger? Well, they're stood right next to you. I can see them, and they can't. I'm on the platform now. There's no one here. I'm looking on the CCTV right now. They're stood right next to you. They're wearing white overalls.
Wow.
And then they've gone back up to the control room to look at the footage or check the person. I don't know if it's live, so they can't play back. And then they've both gone back to check. And they found, I think in that instance, they found white paper overalls lay on one of the benches that you would use for when you're painting or whatever, like disposable ones.
Yeah.
But they'd seen someone there. And there've been other CCTV-based anomalies where in a live scenario, kind of like the petrol station, they're seeing something. I mean, I want to hear the follow-up. I want to hear, well, CCTV is usually good for 30 days before it clears itself out and then recycles for most formal places. So have you got a recording of that and what was happening in real time? It always seems to be in those stories, you're watching it live, but there's, oddly no live recording of it, which is in some ways, for skepticism's sake, it's very convenient.
I mean, you were just telling me, talking about the London Underground thing. I've just remembered that the guy who lives on the other side of me actually has that job, and he's told
Track
me,
walker.
Yeah, he hasn't said anything about ghosts, but he's told me that he'll never eat strawberry jam again.
Oh,
yeah. That's when I stopped asking him questions about that.
Yeah, probably best.
Yeah.
Do you remember there was a film they quickly stopped advertising with Mackenzie Crook from The Office, where he played a London Underground train driver, and he learnt that if you were driving when more than three people jump in front of your train, then it's an instant payoff for the rest of your life. And it was meant to be a comedy film because he was trying to pay homeless people or something like that to do it for him, to jump in front of the train. Where the bonkers thing is, of course, if you're paying someone off and they jump in front of the train, the money's not going to be any good to them. But I think there was a massive kind of pushback from anyone involved in that had been a victim of it or have been down London Underground, that how can you really derive comedy from that? It's an ongoing issue. It's not a historical thing. And so it was one of those films that instantly got forgotten in the mist of time.
I never even heard of it.
I can't remember the title, but I remember it coming out and then it being advertised, then shut down.
I forgot it was Mackenzie Crook, but I definitely remember that premise. Yeah. I wonder if it's still available anywhere.
Oh yeah, I think it still is available, but they just didn't want to because you could argue it's a kind of comedy horror, but it's based on truth in terms of the payout and how such drivers are treated if they so happen to unfortunately end up in that situation, because they are taught various things. I've heard all kinds of advice passed on from driver to driver, which is if you ever see anyone's about to do that, and they will do it last minute, so you never know they're really going to do it, they will jump right in front of you. So my advice is don't look at them, because they'll look you straight in the eyes. So don't. If you know they're going to do it, look away and keep driving, because you can't do anything about it.
So horrible. I do have one final story, which is
aside from strawberry jam on the Underground.
It's lighter than strawberry jam. So when we were on the road recording people's stories, we had one lovely woman came in. She did not want to be recorded, but she allowed us to sort of note her story down so we could recount it later. So she came into our pop-up in Wivenhoe, and she wanted to tell us about her mother who passed back in 94. She'd been a member of the Spiritualist Church, and she unfortunately passed away suddenly after a fall. So it wasn't a long illness. They weren't expecting it. There wasn't any like, I'll, contact you from beyond. Maybe they'd discussed that, but it wasn't like something that was pertinent in her mind. So quite soon afterwards, her brother moved to a new house, but the new house didn't have a doorbell. So he went out and bought a new one, and it was one of these ones that has various different songs on it. And at her mother's funeral, they had played a specific song. It was her mother's favorite song, and it happened to be on the doorbell. And she said it was Acabilk, Strangers on the Shore, which, I mean, nothing, it's just interesting to know it was that song. So her brother installs this doorbell, sets it to a song. He does not set it to Acabilk, Strangers on the Shore, and he's very certain of this. He never set it to that song. But for weeks and weeks after the funeral, it kept resetting itself to that specific song. And I think she said there was something like 16 songs on there that it could have gone on to, but it always went to Acabilk, Strangers on the Shore. So she said that she thought that this was probably her mother keeping an eye on her brother, because her brother actually has haemophilia, and in life her mother was very, very worried about him and was always trying to get on top of him to take his medications, to look after himself. So she had this idea that the Acabilk song was probably just her reminding him to, keep looking after himself and looking after his condition. So that was, I mean, it's an audio, but it's not a voice audio, unfortunately. But it was an interesting one. I've never heard a haunted doorbell before.
No.
I suppose, I mean, we're even going to get that with strange images on ringer doorbells and all sorts. Raymond Bayliss, by 1980, was starting to say in articles that as technology advances, people will start reporting unusual things regarding any kind of technology we develop. And things have become really sophisticated now, where people have reported voices of the dead through their television, and that they have reported strange things on their baby monitors and emails and text messages. So it's,
well, this is when Bethan was talking about the first one, I was wondering when was the Wilson Marriage radio station? Was it like the 80s? Because I remember, wasn't there something about baby monitors in the 80s were using radio frequencies that were too commonly used, and they were like crossing wires quite a lot, because there was a phone hacking thing about that as well. Like something happened with the baby monitors crossing. I don't know how that worked.
I even remember people could listen into conversations next door and stuff like that, so that they would really, it was very accidental, but with its kind of primitive technology, you were gaining access to things that you shouldn't, or, a police radio transmission as it passes your house, even when you had separate speakers to your desktop computer. If a car passed by, you pick up the radio transmission they've got in the car as it goes by. You'd suddenly get it coming in, and then it would fade out again because it was within close range. So you'd have these crossovers, you'd have cross lines on the telephone, and you get a third voice sometimes, which would sound spooky, but it's actually someone from a different conversation nearby. You could have all of these kind of accidental mishaps that would appear spooky.
I mean, it's when it becomes more than coincidence, like the conversations that happen in your book. But it's almost like we're already primed for it, because it could happen anytime, any place. Because
being primed is an interesting thing, because one of the critics, Roger Anderson, said, well, to explain a lot of the calls, they could be due to expectancy and suggestion. But where's that? How many people know about the phenomena of telephone calls from the dead or strange experiences with it? And admittedly, how many people day to day are expecting to have a strange telephone call?
Yeah.
People don't admit to that being on their mind. If the phone rings, you pick it up expecting it to be a legitimate conversation that makes sense. You're not expecting it to be an odd one that doesn't make sense. That's not what you expect. And you don't expect because someone's died, you're going to get a telephone call from them. Right now, we put it in the seat of everyone's mind because I've been talking about it again. I've been on Uncanny. So for some certain people, it is on their mind. But we've talked about expectancy and suggestion in terms of someone's mindset or what they've heard. In a paper I did with Clay Foley, who was part of criminal investigation when he was working, he was involved in the police. And we did a paper called Did E.T. Phone Home or Was It the Dead? And it was about UFO hunters versus ghost hunters, and how some would report what they believed to be alien contacts or men in black listening into their phone conversations because they're getting too close to government information. or ghost hunters that are very much of the mindset of survival of death and ghostly phenomena, and they'd interpret it in more of a deathly morbid type sense. And so background and expectation there is at the forefront because they're doing it all the time. They're engaged in that kind of activity. But for any Tom, Dick, or Harry, Mary, Elizabeth, what other female name? Jessica, whatever. They're going about their business and they're not really thinking about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Did I ever tell you? I know I've told the story of the haunting in my house on here. Cal, I don't know if I've ever told you like what happened in the house I grew up in.
Again, I can't remember.
It must have been thrilling if I did.
Yeah, remember. It's so thrilling. I'm pretending I don't know so I can hear it again.
It's so thrilling. It's a 2-part episode on it. Yes.
Yeah. I'm not going to go through it all again, but one of the phenomena that we had was, it was one particular room. I mean, the whole house had stuff going on, but there was a room that it wasn't very nice in, and like it would physically attack and like move objects, and it was weird. It was very weird. But one of the things that used to happen was you would be on the phone and all of a sudden there would be the same guy's voice coming on, and it would always be shouting, it would always be angry. And I just thought, oh God, I'm picking up a neighbor and they're always arguing. And then there was, oh, what happened now? My friend Zoe, who lived opposite their house, now and again, they would pick it up as well. And there was a couple of times where I think it was when we all, showing at age now, when we all started getting mobile phones, because everyone was getting mobile phones, those really like solid Nokia ones that you could like chuck out of a plane and they'd survive. And so it wasn't just on the landline, it was on the mobile, but it would always be the same argument. It would always be the same man. It would always be the same man shouting. And then it started engaging, very much like with the AI thing, with what you were saying. And so it would sometimes say people's names and then just talk gibberish. And like we'd all like listen in. We'd think it was funny. We're thinking, oh God, we're overhearing an argument here. This is, ooh, what's all this about? And then it started to dawn on us that it was always the same argument. It was like a repetitive thing. It was always like the same like thing, but there would be bits added in. There would be bits like new names, and it would be the people in the room. Just add that into the weirdness that happened in my house.
Well, you get repetition of hauntings where when someone sees the apparition, they might get the same thing over and over again. So if there are crossovers to technology, and it sounds like people actually interacting, but you're not sure if it's a recording, you still got this sort of repetition of events over and over again. That's quite interesting. But who knows where that's come from?
What?
It's quite interesting. I mean, it's not, you can't think that someone's typically picked up the phone to have an argument. It sounds like it's you're listening into an event.
It was like it was like there's an event had taken place on that spot, and you would just hear, like you get like a ghost walks through a wall where there was a door. It's sort of like that time slip. It's not a visitation of something. It's an event replaying.
Whatever happened? Did it sound
like a bum call?
A what?
A bum call, like when someone sat on their phone and it's called and you're hearing the conversation.
No,
and you're going, hello, can you put the phone down now? Did it sound like that you could hear?
No, it didn't sound like that, and it would be very sort of like, it would be very clear, then it would go again and very clear. But again, if it was a bum call, it wouldn't be the same argument at different times throughout years. I'm talking years now. Sorry,
it would be something pretty freaking horrific with all the stuff that happened in your house. It had there must have been something really dire.
Well, the guy that lived, one of the previous people that lived there was a preacher who his whole family died in pretty horrific ways. Like his son was squished outside our house by a runaway car. They literally had to scrape him up. There were some kids who lived in the house who got burnt in the coke ovens across the way. His wife was squashed under she was taking some. She was going across to the ironworks for some reason, and instead of walking around the safe path, she decided to cross the tracks, and a runaway cart with iron ore that was weighing a couple of tons went over her. And he became a recluse after that. And like there's newspaper reports of him having arguments with the neighbors, and he just became, bless him, I think he just completely lost his mind, as you would if all that happened to your family. And I think he lost his faith. I think it was a horrific story, but that's the house I grew up in. No wonder this is how I am.
Sold.
I think I mentioned before that I had a I had activity coming from Facebook from a relative's account that had passed away. And I'd completely forgotten about this until we started talking, but I had a message off of her. And I at the time I mean, and I still assume it was probably one of her children maybe looking into the Facebook and maybe trying to shut it down or something. But I decided to have a look at this message again. It was a link and I've just clicked on it for the first time.
What, just now?
Yeah. I'll share screen because what I've been sent, I honestly don't. It's odd.
So this is a message you've had of someone who's died?
This is a message I've had off of my my great aunt, who this was the link.
The biggest discovered poo in the history belonged to a sick Viking. Here's the story. This
is not her sense of humor at all, so I'm very confused.
It's one of the accounts just hacked, isn't it? But that's brilliant.
Yeah, it must be, because
a sick Viking. Was it like a Pringle tin? Was it like that big?
Oh,
it's that. I don't know if we'll need to edit that out for YouTube, but yeah, that's apparently a message that my great aunt sent to me.
Why have they held it down? Is it that dangerous?
Yeah, it's going to escape.
Yeah, it's
like Mr. Hanky.
I was trying to remember what the face huggers from Alien.
Oh, the face huggers, yeah. Anyway. I did have one more story.
I honestly had never clicked, because I saw that originally and I thought, oh, it's, someone's playing around in my aunt's accounts, and I was really annoyed with it at the time. I was like, I can't believe someone is screwing about in my aunt's account and she's just passed away. And yeah, now I've clicked on it.
Shall I give you pot luck? So, I mean, there's loads of cases in Telephone Calls from the Dead, because it's another analysis of 50 cases. And there's some historical ones. It's about people that tried to make telephones to contact the dead in the 1920s. I know behind me, I've instantly got to hand 2 books and, a book and a journal. And you could pick one or the other, and I'll just read it. I can't even remember what the case are like, and I'll read it out and you can see what you make of it. So let me just grab them. But we've got a choice here. I remember picking this up in a little bookshop in Hay-on-Wye.
Oh, I love Hay-on-Wye.
It was just a random issue of the British Fate magazine, which didn't last very long, compared to the one you see behind me there from America, which goes from 1948 to today.
Very, very nice, very coordinated shelves, by the way, Cal.
I know that they've got to be. I might have to extend either side. Some of them are up in the attic and some are downstairs. So I've got from this, there is Who Phoned the Doctor? I could read you that one. Or from Lord Halifax's Ghost Book. I've got a case in here which I think I pinpointed to come back to later. The Telephone at the Oratory.
Oh, they both sound good.
Which would you like to hear?
Who Phoned the Doctor sounds like an episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, let's do that then. So it's written up by a medical doctor. Dr. Garfield Scott has written this up. And the summary is: a phone call brought him to the side of a critically ill patient, but it seemed nobody had phoned him. I eased the receiver back on its rest, hoping that the phone had not awakened my wife. But she stirred slightly and asked in a sleepy mumble, "Another night call?" It was as simple as that, nothing unusual. Just another night call, we thought. I tore myself from the drowsiness which tugged at my brain, and downstairs the clock struck 3. Once outside, the stimulating spring air roused me fully. By habit, my mind directed itself to the case at hand. I had seen Gus Thornton daily for almost a week, treating the bronchial asthma, which he had for many years. The afternoon before, he seemed at his best. He wanted to know if I would be calling the next day. His last words had been, "See you tomorrow, then." "You're a well man," I had said. "Tomorrow's Sunday. If patience permit, I'll go to church." Turning into Elm Street from the busy thoroughfare, I was startled by a comparative darkness and quiet. Here in this residential section on the edge of town, street lamps and houses were more widely spaced. I thought it strange that my patient's home was dark and silent. Maybe they had rushed him to hospital. Perhaps they had dropped off to sleep again. I pushed the button. Gus's married sister, with whom he lived, called, "Who is it?" She admitted me, and I detected surprise on her face as she led me directly to her brother's room. He was expecting me, all right. "It's not my asthma this time, Doc. I have an awful pain in my stomach, and it's something I ate. No appetite today." His thin, pale face was blanched with agony. Icy perspiration bathed his forehead. And then, gritting his teeth, he was punctuated by low groans. I saw his pain doubling him up as he lay there, his knees drawn up to his chin and his frail fingers interlocked across his midsection. I told the family that immediate treatment was imperative. I made arrangements for his admission to St. Luke's and left for the hospital. At the hospital, everything was done for poor old Gus. He had blood counts, x-rays, electrocardiograms, consultations in rapid fire order. All tests disclosed nothing, but the electrocardiogram did show that his heart was bad. Occasionally, the pain of coronary heart attack is felt mostly in the stomach region. Despite our feverish efforts, the brave little man died late that Sunday afternoon. I found Gus's two sisters and brother waiting in one of the hospital reception rooms. I approached the anxious family, determined to clear the question that had haunted me from the moment I turned into the darkened Elm Street on that night call. I wanted to know who had phoned me. Why had they seemed surprised at my arrival? "Which of you ladies called me to come and see Gus late night?" I asked. They stared at me in bewilderment, mouths open. They exchanged glances. The elder sister was first to regain her composure. "It's strange that you should ask us. We were just discussing that very question. You see, Doctor, nobody phoned you for Gus last night."
Oh,
Ooh, wow.
There's a few like that. Weirdly, in one of Elliot O'Donnell's books, Ghosts, Helpful or Harmful, there's another similar case in which someone phoned the doctor. He went to the exact house. Treatment was required. That person was in need of medical assistance, but no one had made the call.
I really enjoy those types of stories where it's almost like a warning's happened beforehand.
Yeah, and there are a few cases where they weren't in the categories, but in terms of what they were regarding, I've pointed out warnings and sometimes even premonitions via these telephone calls of saying don't do X, Y, or Z, and the person does, but then some sort of event still plays out, so they realise what they could have gotten themselves into had they have not taken the advice of the ghostly caller.
From the story, I can't quite remember. The doctor's wife had seen him on the phone?
She stirred and mumbled because he was putting the phone back down quietly on the receiver, and she said another night call, and he said yes, and it was 3 a.m. So it stirred her as well.
Yeah, because I was wondering if it was like he'd seen him. He'd seen him during the day, hadn't he?
Yeah.
I was wondering if he'd maybe like picked up on like sort of hints or signs that heart attack was coming, and maybe he'd dreamt it and decided to go. But if she's
his wife saw him.
Yeah.
Because he's not just woken up and thought he's had a call. He's saying that he remembers putting it down, and it's enough to stir her.
Oh, to be honest, sometimes I wake up with my phone in my hand like that. Immediately in the face.
Well, if I'm falling asleep with it like that, sometimes I wake up because I drop it on my face.
I actually, like at 3 a.m. wake up, but that's a different problem. That sometimes I wake up with my arm above my head for no good reason. So I must just be grabbing my phone and then doing that, because it didn't used to be with my phone, but now it is.
I had one more and a half. and unfortunately I can't
One
find
and a half.
one. Well, I've got a little one, a little one. But there was the WhatsApp one, which I know you're reading a book on WhatsApp calls, aren't you, at the moment? And this one was sent, it's not Essex based. Someone in like the paranormal community saw that we put a call out and then saw immediately afterwards that this was on Twitter. And I can't find the story now because it was on my notes that mysteriously disappeared. But it was one of the companions in Doctor Who was she used to be in Doctor Who. I can't remember which one it was now. Elsa, can you?
What kind of you didn't tell me about this one until you came over on Friday, but what kind of era was it? We can narrow it down.
Oh, like I'm thinking it was like Tom Baker era.
Oh, okay.
Um,
I don't really know the those ones so well, but
so the woman who was still alive, she was one of the companions. I can't remember which one now, but she received WhatsApp messages from the person who played Romana, who had died. So a companion of the Doctor receiving WhatsApp messages from a dead companion, and they were strange, but they were also like stuff that only she would know. And they couldn't quite place it because it was her phone number. No one else was using it. They checked, and they're still getting messages of Romana, which is,
wow.
it sounds like a Doctor Who episode. But yeah,
Is there an article on that or something? How did you come across that?
there is an article. I'll find it and send it to you. But
Yeah, please, because if they're still having it, it's something to have a look at.
yeah. And the
What was
half
your,
story. Sorry,
I was about to say, what was your little half then?
my little half. Well, no, it's just, do you know what? It's not anything telephone call related, but when you were telling the story about the doctor and saying, "Oh, I'll see you tomorrow," then it reminded me of something that happened to my granddad, who used to work at a hospital. He worked at a mental health hospital, and there was one of the patients who would always like to like meet my granddad at the bottom of the stairs because he got on well with him, and they would like after whatever session he had, he would always go and find my granddad, who would be walking around the grounds, and he would always ask for a cigarette off my granddad. And he didn't smoke cigarettes, but he always used to carry them because he wanted to give them to this guy. And he came in one day, and this patient was at the bottom of the stairs waiting for him. I was like, "All right, Jack, how are you?" And they just had their normal sort of chat. And he said, "Yo, I've got to go into a lecture now, but I'll come and find you later." And so, all right, see you later, Doc. And they arranged to go on their normal thing. He says, "Oh, before you go, can I bum a cigarette off you?" And he said, "Yeah, of course." So he offered his little case of the cigarettes, and he went off happy as anything. And he went upstairs, and they were all a bit sad, and they were like, "Oh, Jack, we don't know how to tell you this." I can't remember the guy's name, but he said, "So and so died last night." And it was the guy who we always met to go for a walk. And they said, "Yeah, it must have been late last night. He had a heart attack. Really sorry, you got on well with him." And he looked in his cigarette case, and there was a cigarette missing. So he had handed this cigarette to this guy, who then walked off, but he died hours previous.
Mm.
So I know it's not a telephone call, but it just reminded me of it talking about the doctor.
No, I like those cases, even with like when people talk about time warps, which I know is of interest to both of you at the moment, seeing a time warp case where people claim that when they've gone into it and they've gone back to a previous time and innocently not realizing the case, they just notice things aren't right,
Right.
until the end of it when they look back and things are back to normal. So literally stepping back into a time period rather than seeing it in the mind's eye. They've picked something up and they've taken it with them.
Yeah.
And that's existed at the other end, but nothing else has.
Yeah.
Anne Winsper talked about one where I think it was like some photographic plates they were given or some slates or something.
Yeah.
And they
Talk on that ASAP,
disintegrated
didn't she?
at the end. Yeah. There was one she presented to the SPR ages ago, which was about this material disintegrating or something like that afterwards.
Oh, that's fabulous. There's a couple of Essex cases. I think, Elsie, you're asking me what do I want to do next? Maybe time slips.
Yeah, we can. We'll fight it out.
Well, one that you should really, you
want
might
an
want to
easy-
get in contact with Dr. Paul Rogers, who was at the University of Central Lancashire for a long while. He was Anne Winsper's PhD supervisor. And right now, because he's friends with Debs Oakes, who was involved in this case, he's picked up this case again. Only recently has this book been republished. People wanted it for ages because it came out in the late 80s, called The Vertical Plane. It was the Doddleston Messages.
Oh, yeah.
But it's been out now as a second edition by Ken Webster. Absolutely bizarre communication over an old BBC computer through time from this guy from several hundred years ago. I think who turned out initially was going by the name Lucas, but turned out to be someone called Thomas Harden, I think it was. And at moments, Debs, who was living in the cottage, she had sort of time slip moments where she walked into the kitchen and it was, and she saw him sat there at the table in the kitchen. And they did a little, if you go on YouTube, there's a little sort of BBC dramatization of it, explaining the case, where they took a little bit of poetic license and Deb's relationship to the ghost as he was. So it wasn't really quite like a ghost, because it was like he was very much alive and on his own time frame. And they believed they were getting communication from the year 2109 that was controlling this time stream and this communication. I even mention it in Telephone Calls from the Dead, that this is an unusual computer-based interaction that's, certainly anomalous. And the SBR investigators, spontaneous case investigators, went to check it out. They couldn't figure out what was going on. They did have related poltergeist activity, pots and pans stacked, all the furniture in the living room pushed to one side of the room. I wonder if they actually reproduced the photographs in it. Yeah, like that. See, look, all pushed up against one side of the room.
God.
Oh, yeah.
And, they'd return to the cottage with it like that.
That's
they
not
get
just
right.
shifting slightly. That is
No, they're all stacked, even stuff in the kitchen, the cooker knocked over and things stacked up. So they had some very strange things, and sometimes very delicately placed. It'd only require a finger to knock it all down. So a lot of these pages are full of the text that they would find on the computer, and they're in Old English writing, so that the next page will talk about exactly what the translation is. You can read them as they are, but then you can read the exact translation.
Yes, I remember this. So as soon as you said about the text on the computer, I remember hearing about this before somewhere.
I mean,
We
all the
talked about
raw
it a lot,
notes
the
were
Uncanny.
kept. They exist in Wales and in the Isle of Man, unless Debs has moved everything over from the Isle of Man. But they were dot matrix printouts, so that kind of ink printout fades over time. So they're all in plastic wallets, but they need kind of digitizing. But the current project that Paul is working on is looking into this as thoroughly as he can, because no one's ever afforded themselves the time to look into it. As bizarre a PhD topic as it could be, this could be a perfect 3 or 4 year project for someone to look into.
I will look into that. I wanted to read The Vertical Plane. It's, I've just got a massive pile of books to be read. I keep trying to get through your book, Cal, but my mum keeps pinching it.
Well, I read The Vertical Plane in its original first edition format. I had this moment. I don't know if it was when I was writing Telephone Calls on Dead. It must have been, for me to then track down the book. So maybe I was an undergraduate at the time, and I'd already met Debs at that point. I knew her quite well, and I'd gone online searching forums for communication over time through a computer. I'd seen that BBC dramatization in the early 90s, and it really stuck with me. It was very creepy. And as I started to ask out, I think I found the book title, and then I was interacting with people on the Amazon comment feed. People were quite active on it, talking about the case, when you could actually reply to feedback on there. I don't think you can anymore. And then Debs cropped up and she said, this is the case I was involved in, Cal. And then so I started speaking to her directly, and she sent me a new copy of the book, and I just read it cover to cover. I thought, wow, I had no idea it'd been detailed this well. And even then, just like This House is Haunted by Guy Playfair detailing Enfield, it's only barely a third of what was documented summarized into this kind of overview of, this is the case. So all this raw data exists somewhere else. But in terms of strange technology, which we've talked about today, it's the most bizarre one by far involving a computer. Doddleston Messages.
Doddleston Messages. I think they did an episode on it in Astonishing Legends. I think that's where probably we remember it from, Elsa. Right.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you for waiting for me.
Yes, it was worth it.
Worth the wait.
Worth the wait. Yeah. I'm hoping now I know we put out a call for stories, but I'm hoping maybe this episode will stir some people's memories. Maybe there's some other cases that could come forward out of
I have
this.
to say, this was the hardest one by far to research.
Harder than Stones, and Stones nearly like
Stones nearly ended in a crying session.
Yeah, we're at the arse end of the glacier in Essex. We've got nothing.
If you're only trying to keep it to Essex, then all those haunting related things that then someone's committed to record in any way, you're really going to struggle with the telephone based stuff, because even Rogo and Bayliss in the 70s, they'd gone through everything they could think of. There's so much psychical research history, and I couldn't name any one journal paper or even letter to editor that mentions these. They were in other places. They're in private letters to people. They're in books. They're in like old magazine articles, but written by authorities. Because that story that I read to you is from a medical doctor.
Yeah, this is something we run into a lot, because one of the reasons we obviously started the podcast is because Essex gets a bad rep, and it doesn't get very much like interest from people in terms of folklore. And I mean, it does, but not in the same way that maybe other parts of the country do.
Like Suffolk, Norfolk, East Anglia, sort of forgotten. We're just like in addition to London.
A lot of trying to slightly rehabilitate the reputation of Essex for a place where folklore can be sort of originated, has been trying to actually get into these private records and finding ways of accessing all this information that is out there. It's just that it really just got overlooked.
We found that when we went on the road, like the amount of people who, once you get them talking, knew loads, and it's not written down. Like the village I live in is old. There's nothing written down about it, but it was the most successful place, wasn't it? It was still getting stuff from it. People tuning.
And not just about that village, but about all, like, because where was Jane talking about? That was little something, I can't remember. But she had so much information on the background and history on it that it isn't.
It's an entire book's worth.
Yeah, it wasn't available anywhere else. But that was all the sort of recorded, the passed down oral folklore of it.
Yep. That's what we do.
Commit it to record then. You're gathering them, start writing them down.
We should really. Start with haunted beaches.
Yeah.
Exactly.
My vote's for that one on the next subject.
But how did you word it? Oh, I do want to be haunted by the seaside. What was that?
I do like to haunt beside the seaside.
Yeah, call it that then.
I want to be beside the seaside. Yeah.
Tell Cal.
What would the front cover be? Would it just be a ghostly hand and an ice cream?
Like a transparent hand with an ice cream and under a brolly. One of the old saucy postcards, but everyone's a ghost.
I like that. Tell Cal the two titles you came up with for this episode.
It's either going to be Hello from the Other Side or Video Haunts the Radio Star.
I quite like the Video Haunts the Radio Star.
I like that one.
I think we're going to have to go with that one now, because it's, amused you, so.
And it'll get that song stuck in people's head, and it is a good song.
Yeah. It has been stuck in my head since I thought of it, so it was just over a month ago.
Well, Cal, thank you so much for joining us, Han, and it was really interesting hearing the stories.
Yeah, thank you for the stories.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing yours as well.
Right. Where can people find your book? Where's the best place to buy? Is it Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon. Some people have contacted me through my website directly if they want signed copies, which I can do. They even recently, because of telephone calls coming back, people wanted signed copies of things like Conversations with Ghosts, which was a book that I edited together, which was originally meant to be one by Alex Tannis, who I've had on my coffee mug throughout this. There is Alex Tannis. But he wrote that book. I put it together. So people have been asking for signed copies. So website, callumeCooper.com. Or you can go to Amazon, look up Callum E Cooper, and it'll bring up all books where I've either written them, edited them, or contributed forwards, and they're on there. So everything from Telephone Calls from the Dead, Paracoustics, Psy Wars, Psy and Psychotherapy. There's a few on there. I even did a forward that I forgot, my good friend David Scanlon, for Haunted Cornwall or Paranormal Cornwall. I had a student pick that up recently and said, "Oh, you did the forward for it." And I went, "Oh, yes, I did."
Oh,
It was a long time in the making, so that's why I forgot I had done that.
And are you going to be on any more Uncanny? Do you know?
I don't know. Got open contract with them for the rest of Uncanny USA, but I imagine right now they're tying together all the last of the episodes. So I'm ready to jump on board if they present me with another case. And I know they're just starting to tour again as well at the moment. So it's an open door. We'll see what cases they bring.
Lovely. Well,
We're
thank
going
you.
to do our sign off.
Yeah, so it's goodbye from Bethan.
It's goodbye from Elsa.
And goodbye from me.
You ruined it. It's goodbye from Cal.
Goodbye from Cal.
Bye.
Bye.
And I didn't say fuck once.
We're going to keep that in at the end.
If you'd like to get in contact with us with a story of your own or any more information about what we've discussed in this episode, you can reach us at eerieessexpodcast@gmail.com.
Or if you'd like to contact us on social media, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram under the handle Eerie Essex. On Twitter, we are under Eerie_Essex. You can also find us on Patreon and Ko-fi if you'd like to support the podcast.